Curious how to get textures inside of your spinnings? Check this video out. So these are 4 different textures that I used as samples and then show how they end up on the inside of spinnings. Now it's not possible to have a texture survive the spinning process because it'll be burnished flat while it's being spun. But what I think is really interesting is that the textures on the inside will distort slightly but still remain depending on how far the metal is stretched and spun down or how tightly up against the chuck. So these were some rolling mill samples, if you've seen that video. And so this is rolled through punched openings in a brass plate, and then through the spinning process you can see those circles starting to distort but still visually remaining within the piece. And then this is a stamped blank where XOXO has been stamped repeatedly into the metal, and then again within the spinning you can see the X and the O still remaining visually but stretching out, particularly the more that the metal is stretched. And then this is just a hammered piece, and then a lot of that planishing remains on the piece. And what's also interesting is on the outside, I don't know if it'll show in the camera, but there's a slight kind of faceting or distortion that happens on the spinning process that looks like it's been hammered from the outside as well. So that's a nice kind of detail or aspect of the piece of having a texture inside. And then the most shallow texture, which I was curious if it would stay, would be from the filing video, if you remember that checkering file, rubbing the checkering file on the metal. And then you can see in the piece, it's not as visible on the spinning, but definitely in the bottom of the spinning, which would otherwise be really difficult to. So these can be nice little details within a finished piece for a person to discover as they're really exploring your work. So I will get set up and then spin these samples and show you how that goes. Okay, so I've set the first blank, which is the rolling mill texture through the punched holes, and I'm just gonna, as usual, it's been centered and lubricated, and then I'm just gonna seat it against the chuck with the undersized follower block. I don't want to push it too far. It can get off center or even punch a hole with an undersized follower block like that. So I'll just set that off to the side, switch to the follower block that's larger than the chuck, which will keep the blank firmly against the spinning chuck. There we go. Make sure everything's tightened down. Ready to spin again. Now with small scale spinnings, it's really important to watch how much force you're using and to not have too much force at the lip, which can cause it to wrinkle and collapse in. Now I'm also probably using about equal force forward and back spinning to keep the wall thickness balanced. And again, sometimes you're going to get some of that creaking based on how a follower block might seat against the spinning. And for demonstration purposes, that's probably enough. I could trim it and lay it completely down against the chuck, but this will give you a sense. And you can even see on this one, because of the variable thicknesses of the spinning, that you could even get some tearing out of it. But you do get some of that kind of plannish texture. And then also you still have some of that texture remaining on the inside of the spinning. Now we'll take a look at the punched one. Okay, so I've got the stamped blank centered and lubricated. I'm just going to seat it against the chuck with the undersized follower block. That's enough to get it recentered. Make sure that's tightly up against the chuck, and we're ready to go again. Also, another thing with small scale spinnings is the part of the tool that you're able to get in there to use, and then also the design of your chucks is really important to give you that access. And it's probably enough for now. Give you a sample. And again, getting some of that kind of distortions in texture on the outside due to the slightly different thickness of metal from the stamping on the inside. But it would otherwise be nearly impossible to get that texture and certainly not have it distorted if you did that after the spinning process. So now we'll move on to the hammered blank. All right, and again on the hammered blank, I have it centered and lubricated. I'm just going to seat it against the chuck there. And change the follower block. All right, and we're ready to finish this one up. And if it does get a little bit out of center like this, either you can go with it and trim it later depending on the needs of the piece, or you can just go ahead and trim it now. For this quick little demo, I'm just going to go on ahead. That's probably enough to give you a sense for this little demo. And again, you can still see a little bit of that hammer texture remaining on the inside there. And we'll get to the last but least, scratch texture. All right, so I've got this set up, centered and lubricated with the undersized follower block. And we'll just get it seated against the chuck there to start. And if I continued with that, you might have seen that the spinning kind of twist a little bit there against that follower block. And it can, if you don't watch that, actually even punch a hole in the bottom. So that's why I always like to switch out to a larger follower block, even though it's a bit of extra stages and time and work. All right, everything's tightened down. We're ready to go again. Now the metal thickness on this one is pretty uniform because the scratch texture is probably the least deep into the metal, so it spins a lot more regularly and with more uniformity. But if you'll notice, if you really spin the metal a lot, it's going to even stretch or burnish out those marks on the interior as well. It's probably good enough for this sample. And again, you can see it certainly in the bottom of the spinning and along the lip where it hasn't spun as much, but along those walls you're going to lose a little bit of that definition. So hopefully this has been an interesting exploration of textures within your spinnings. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you can hear from me when I post future videos. Thanks for stopping by.